my name is Casey, and this is my presentation. So, as stated by our book, a simple definition for emergency management is a discipline that deals with risk and risk avoidance. It is an essential role of the government. It provides the essential and the necessary framework for avoiding risks and how to handle a disaster when it happens. The difference between emergency management and integrated emergency management is basically the idea that integrated means that it focuses more on help and assistance provided by all the levels of government as well as community. Integrated emergency management allows unification of the government and the community so that they can successfully provide any necessary contributions to communities that might require prevention from disasters or might even be in the process of recovering from one. According to the author of A Framework for Integrated Emergency Management, McLaughlin states, "The time to think about emergencies is before they happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when." This presentation will cover topics about emergency management and all of the 5 phases that come with it. A member of President Carter's cabinet named John Macy would come to be the first director of FEMA. John Macy had the important task of creating an organization that could both be physically and philosophically united. Ultimately, John Macy is the one who came up with the idea of integrated emergency management. This new system and ideas and ways of looking at things that Macy created would introduce a system that could provide direction, control, and warning as functions that could mitigate all disasters, however big or small they might be. John Macy's efforts were not really recognized right away. It was not until after Hurricane Katrina that the integrated model received the recognition that it so rightfully deserved. After Hurricane Katrina, the country was desperate to prevent another disaster like that from happening again. Thankfully, this system that John Macy helped construct was able to do just that. It was able to better prepare communities for any potential emergencies in the future. Even though the concept of integrated emergency management was created back in the 70s, it is still a very important and effective tool used today. It is crucial when identifying, analyzing, or assessing any functional capabilities that the government and the community might have to respond to an emergency. In my opinion, one of the most important aspects of integrated emergency management is that all levels of government and community must have common objectives, but they must divide certain tasks among themselves respectively. They must divide the tasks based on who can handle them and who can do it quickly and effectively. According to FEMA, unification suggests that the use of centralized planning and decentralized execution is the best way to go. Dividing and conquering allows all levels of government and community to complete their tasks effectively, since they have been assigned specifically to those who have resources to do so. A perfect example of modern-day integrated emergency management is cell phones. They are owned by most of the world's population, and being able to send out messages and alerts to specific communities who potentially could be affected by a disaster is one instance where integrated emergency management is used today. It utilizes and it takes advantage of technology that was not available in the past, and it's able to use it to successfully communicate information to many people in a certain area in a very short amount of time. There are 5 phases of emergency management, and that includes prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and the National Disaster Recovery Framework. Once again, we see the idea of integrated emergency management emerge when all 5 of these phases have the same goal but different tasks. The division of these 5 phases is crucial to ensure that any community that has experienced or is susceptible to disaster is able to do their best to prevent it, to protect themselves, to mitigate in any case of emergency, and respond to the needs of those affected. First off, we will start with talking about prevention. Prevention is the responsibility that lies in the hands of regular old community members all the way to senior government officials, and it includes everyone in between. The National Prevention Framework offers very clear guidelines to explain what should be done about information that might suggest there's a threat or imminent danger to the homeland, and how the government and the community can both prevent it from happening. In this prevention framework, there are 7 core prevention capabilities. It begins with sort of a general plan, followed by a public warning, which can include information that the public should be aware of. The following 5 steps are operational coordination, forensics, intelligence, and information preparedness. It also includes interdiction and disruption, and finally, a screening, research, and detection. All of these 7 core capabilities basically just help facilitate a functional prevention plan. It creates order so that there is a plan for everyone to follow. Some of these emergencies, like natural disasters and terrorist attacks, they can be inevitable and unpredictable. So this framework allows extensive measures to be taken to reduce the risk that the community is affected by. The prevention framework does everything it can to help the community to not be in a state of vulnerability, and that is why this first phase is so important. The next phase is protection. This National Protection Framework outlines steps that can safeguard against any acts of terrorism, natural disasters, or even threats and hazards. A bit more extensive than the prevention framework, the protection framework has 11 protection core capabilities. Some of these focus on cybersecurity and physical protection, as well as risk management. According to the Department of Homeland Security, critical infrastructure protection includes actions to deter the threat, to reduce vulnerability, or even to minimize the consequences associated with an attack, a natural disaster, or even a man-made disaster. Needless to say, if the prevention plan does not work, then the protection plan must quickly follow. The physical health and the safety of the community is top priority. I love this picture of Dr. Strange because I think it's a perfect representation of what protection needs to be. It should be a shield around communities who cannot prevent certain disasters from happening. The third phase is mitigation, which basically means that is a sustained action to reduce or eliminate the risks to people and property from such hazards and their effects. This phase is definitely much different than any of the other 4 phases of the emergency management plan. This is because it focuses more on long-term solutions to the risk reduction rather than preparedness for any of the situations. Another major difference in the mitigation phase is that it utilizes people who aren't typically inside of the traditional emergency management circle. So that would mean that they could be land use planners who are involved in construction and building management. They could be business owners or insurance companies, or even community leaders and politicians. Like, it's very obvious that these people aren't typically associated with emergency management, but they do have a very important role in mitigation, and that really sets this phase apart from all the other 4 phases. The reason that the mitigation phase finds it important to use these types of people is because they're typically really good at planning or marketing or making good political decisions. And these skills aren't typically ones that first responders might have. It even says in our emergency management book that historically emergency management professionals have been quite reluctant to take on any lead role in promoting mitigation. This is simply because it is just outside of their realm of expertise. Although it is not completely similar to the other 4 phases, let's not forget that mitigation is just as equally as important as all of the other 4 phases, and it really shows its value of life and property over everything else. The 4th phase is response. Now, the National Response Framework was created to ensure that all government and even non-government officials, the private sector, and emergency management practitioners understand their roles and responsibilities to adequately respond to emergency situations. The importance of this phase is to be well equipped and ready to respond and be prepared for any emergency or disaster. Just like any of the other national frameworks, the response framework is always adapting and trying to train its responders to respond better. For example, the attacks on September 11th were obviously not something that the United States had planned for, but it exposed the nation's unpreparedness, and since then, the framework and the procedures have become better, and we can respond better in the future. Finally, we have come to the 5th phase, which is the National Disaster Recovery Framework. So this is one of the most important phases of the emergency management plan because really it's just essential to the future of any community who's affected by an emergency situation or a disaster. Practitioners of the emergency management plan consider this recovery framework to be one of the most essential. The decisions that are made during the recovery phase encompass a large variety of tasks, and this can include rebuilding homes and businesses, and even providing people with shelter and food. This recovery phase has 2 main categories, one being short-term and the other being long-term. In the short-term recovery, it is more concerned with the immediate emergency response that's necessary for the public health services, transportation needs, and food and shelter. However, the long-term recovery deals